Modernizing digital services and making sure they stay secure requires good identity management, especially if there's money or financial transactions involved. For how the Treasury's Bureau of the Fiscal Service approaches it, recently I spoke with Joe Gioeli, Deputy Commissioner for Transformation and Modernization, starting with precisely who are the Bureau's constituents.
Tell us, there's so many aspects to identity and the importance, clearly, for the Fiscal Service, but maybe just start with a range of the constituents that you serve. Is there any element of the general public, or is it strictly other federal entities that you have to verify payments to and for?
Yeah, so we have a wide scope of customers, starting with federal agencies and entities through some of the shared services we provide. We also have a wide range of public-facing services like Treasury Direct, Pay.gov, and others. And so we have a variety of identity challenges to master as a result of that.
Can you provide backup, for example, if an agency authorizes payment to someone? Do you have a means of saying, as the actual authority, because checks all come from the Treasury, they don't come from the agency name, to say, wait a minute, stop, not personally, but say, this doesn't add up?
Yeah, so we don't necessarily get directly engaged in the authorization of payments, and so our goal is to head that off up front, and so make sure agencies have access to information that makes sure they make the right payment to the right person at the right time.
And what kinds of changes are you making into the Bureau's own systems to modernize them so that they can accommodate better ID practices?
So we're on a transformation and modernization journey. Ultimately, from the tech perspective, we're moving to a lot of cloud-based services and leveraging those native services to ensure the right security and resiliency. We're also looking at things like enterprise APIs and federating and making data available to agencies and to our customers earlier so they can modify their business processes and support some of that integrity work.
Tell us about the Payment Integrity Target Team.
So it's the Payment Integrity Tiger Team, and in essence, they are working with the Bureau's Office of Payment Integrity to provide a new evolution of the services they provide. And so the Office of Payment Integrity works pretty hard to make sure that we're making the right payment to the right person at the right time, and they have an audacious goal to reduce improper payments overall. And so this Tiger Team is taking on doing market research, looking for new ways to provide information that fortifies that effort and make sure that we're getting direct feedback from agencies to provide them consumable services.
Because the feedback keeps coming from pandemic relief about how much of it is fraud. It's probably twice what we even have acknowledged so far. Has that been a big impetus for some of the ID management discussions we're hearing?
Yeah, and we know a lot of that originates at the eligibility phase where a constituent goes to access a federal benefit program and ultimately the friction up front around gating, validation and verification of that identity. And so in a lot of these programs, some of that eligibility criteria is difficult. Not all the information is available to the agencies to make the right determination on that identity or the parameters of the program. And so that's where we're trying to help to see what information we can make available to agencies to improve that process.
Because there's an added complexity here. ID management is one thing. Eligibility is something else.
It is, yep. And that falls squarely on the owner of that federal benefit program overall. But we know there's a role we can play given the access to different data sets we have.
Is it better to have complex eligibility or simple eligibility?
Well, I guess that's a good question at this point. It would seem simple, but simple things are not always simple, so I guess it depends.
And you also are doing a lot of work in business entity validation, which is mainly in the contracting and grant area, and I imagine there's a lot of ripe territory there.
Yeah, so that's more emerging at this point. So in essence, it's much more easy to validate an identity of an individual. There's this representative phase in a business entity validation that needs to occur, and ultimately you have to rely on more data sets to make that determination. So there's a little bit more complexity in that scenario.
So that gets back to the modernizing idea. You need to do a lot of almost instantaneous verification against external databases.
Yes, that's right. And so you need to use the data you have and the data you're actually able to access in order to make that verification.
And from just a technical standpoint, should agencies be building lakes of their own data to speed that up, even as they also have to include, say, commercial open source sources of data which they cannot put in their lakes?
Yeah, I look at fraud as very much like I look at cyber. It's a team sport. And I think the way to improve the conditions and some of the challenges around fraud is to share information broadly within the constraints you have and making sure that at both across federal programs and even at state and local levels.
What's your tie-in with login.gov? That's kind of a shared service. Your shared services in another area. We'll get to the PKI. How do you interoperate with them or cooperate with login.gov in all of this effort?
Yeah, so we are a subscriber to their services. We firmly believe in the login.gov services. We also use ID.me for that measure. We are very excited about Login getting in place their IAL2 level requirement at this point, so we can further add that to our choice in the Kaya solution.
Yeah, Kaya, common approach to identity assurance.
Yes. So Kaya is basically an enterprise-wide service we put together a few years ago, which allows programs to create and manage digital identity in a standard and consistent way, leveraging those third-party credential service providers like ID.me and login.gov. We have really good uptake and adoption right now. We are supporting over 550 production applications across Treasury and some other federal agencies, and we've supported actually over 50 million authentications through Kaya since the start of fiscal year 24.
What's going on with biometrics in this whole regard?
Yeah, so I think that goes back to the third-party credential service provider. It's that requirement specifically for Identity Assurance Level 2 that requires some kind of visual proofing. In most cases, biometrics is used in the virtual proofing aspect of things.
And one aspect that Treasury has been concentrating on writ large, Treasury Department, is the unbanked, the underserved, the people that don't have access to some of the systems that other citizens do. How does that roll into the whole ID effort?
Yeah, so that's a major concentration and focus point for us. And, the login.gov team has done a really good about finding brick and mortar to do that specifically. So the login.gov team, they are partnering with the U.S. Postal Service and using that brick and mortar to provide that identity proofing, which we hope gets to some of the digital competency or digital access gaps that are out there.
And your portfolio, though, is expanded beyond just identity management. You're kind of the modernizing and transformational guru there.
Yeah, our transformation and modernization organization was born from an effort the Bureau put forward called our Future Readiness Assessment, which is really a journey we embarked on to understand what do we need to do organizationally to make sure we can meet the mission of the future. And so my portfolio includes, the Chief Information Officer, Chief Financial Officer, Chief Data Officer, and the Chief Human Resources Officer, but also a couple of new roles like the Chief Customer Officer and the Chief Strategy Integration Officer. And ultimately, we're here to drive transformation more holistically across the enterprise, across people, process, technology, and data, while improving the way we deliver experience.
And how long have you been there?
So I've been at Fiscal as a whole for 7 years. I've been in this role for roughly 6 months at this point.
Wow. And before Fiscal?
Before Fiscal, I was at the U.S. Mint. Before that, I was at the Internal Revenue Service. And so I like to tell people I'm making my journey around Treasury. Treasury is truly a great place to work. And you can show up at all these different bureaus and organizations and do something completely different, but it all lends to the same mission.
All right, so do you still advocate for the retention of the penny from your Mint background?
I think there are other challenges around the cost these days, and I'll leave that to the professionals.
Joe Gioeli, Deputy Commissioner for Transformation and Modernization at the Bureau of the Fiscal Service, speaking at a recent ACT-IAC conference. Find this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive and subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.